Great, thank you. Thank you for joining us today to consider comments related to the submittal of a moving to work plan and application under rent reform to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Moving to Work program is a federal designation that allows flexibility and creativity in how the Housing Choice Voucher program is operated. The goals of the MTW program are to 1, expand housing choice for low-income families, 2, create efficiencies in service delivery, 3, assist families in making progress towards self-sufficiency. Submitting an application does not guarantee the Metro HRA will be awarded MTW status. If awarded, the Metro HRA will conduct an extensive engagement to develop a formal MTW plan. At the end of the public hearing, when the pre-registered commenters have been heard, and the Community Development Committee will then continue, excuse me. Let's see, I'm having trouble here again. I was doing so well there for a little bit. Well, we're going to proceed, and I'm going to wing it.
Councilmember Vento,
yes,
this is Lisa Barajas.
Yes.
I think now would be an appropriate time to call on any members of the public that would like to speak to this item.
Perfect.
And I would just offer that we did not receive any pre-registered commenters on this item.
Okay, so given that we don't have any pre-registered commenters on this item, again, the record is open until December 14th, 2020. And again, we urge folks to comment prior to that time. Lisa, if you could, I'm having trouble accessing the 3 ways with which they can comment. If you would note those, please.
Sure, absolutely.
Sorry.
The public comments will be accepted through 4:30 p.m. December 14th of 2020. To comment on the submittal of the Moving to Work application and plan, members of the public may write to the council at 390 Robert Street North in St. Paul, Minnesota, 55101. They may email the council at public.info@metc.state.mn.us, or they may record a comment on the public comment line at 651-602-1500, and that's TTY 651-291-0904. Councilmember Vento, you might also ask whether there are any members of the audience that would like to speak, even if they did not pre-register. I don't see anybody, but it might be good to ask.
Are there any members of the audience who would like to speak?
Councilmember Vento,
yes.
Point of order.
Yes.
Just do with this. This is an official public hearing. Do we need to have a motion and a second and approval to open the public hearing and then officially close it then in December when the public hearing ends? It's just something that
That's a good question.
Excuse me, this is Michelle, and may I address that?
Yes.
We do not need a motion for this public hearing. And then your information will state when it closes. I do have a point of order. Once we do close the public hearing, we would have to approve the minutes of the previous meeting.
Very good. Thank you, Michelle.
And
we'll get through this meeting somehow, and hopefully we'll all be sane when we're done.
And I hope Director Barajas can collaborate or corroborate that too.
That is correct.
Madam Chair, just one thing, we won't be closing the public hearing today because it's continued on until December 14th. Okay, thank you.
Correct. Any other questions or comments there? Okay, if not, and I don't see anyone asking to speak, we will move on and go back to our agenda in the order that we should be. Terry Smith, was there anything you wanted to say at this point before we take up the minutes?
Thank you, Chair Vento. Just one thing, that public hearing will close after you determine nobody's here to comment, the public comment period will remain open
Got
through
it.
December 14th.
Very
Thank you.
good. Okay. I want to take a moment here to thank Chair Lilligren, Councilmember Molly Cummings, Councilmember Reva Chambliss, and Councilmember Judy Johnson. They have served on an ad hoc committee that dealt a lot with this program, along with, I'm sorry, I'm overstating this. I'm jumping ahead in the agenda. Never mind that. I'll come back to that later. I was so prepared, and Lisa did a great job of helping me get ready for today. And now that I'm having trouble finding the script, I'm screwing things up. So bear with me, please. So back to, we are done with the public comment, or excuse me, the public hearing. The public comment will remain open until December 14th, 2020. We will now go to the minutes of our last meeting.
Madam Chair, I'll move approval of the minutes. Johnson.
Okay.
Chambliss seconds.
Chambliss seconds. Okay, and for the record, we're approving the November 2nd, 2020 minutes. Any discussion, corrections, additions? Seeing none, can you take roll call for us, Michelle?
Yes, Chair Bento. Atlas Ingebrigtsen,
Here.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren, excuse me, Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musset, Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
And the motion carried. We'll now move on to our only consent item, and this is the item that I wanted to call out our colleagues on the committee for. Council members Cummings, Chambliss, Johnson, and Chair Lilligren were involved with the staff in helping to come up with the recommendations that Terry Smith is going to present to us tonight. I want to thank them and all of the staff. This has been an enormous amount of work, and they've done a great job. So, Terry, if you would. Item 2020-318, the 2021 payment standards for Metro HRA rent assistance programs.
Let's see.
Madam Chair, this is on consent agenda, and so we weren't intending to provide a presentation. I apologize for the confusion on that.
You don't need to apologize. I should just get my act together here. I apologize to everyone. I didn't start cocktail hour at all, much less early, and so I just it's feeling like Friday the 13th.
Chair Vento,
Yes.
may I? This is Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen. One, you don't need to apologize. We are all human. So just take a moment, get what you need, relax. Know we're here for you. We are full of grace and support.
Oh, you are
'Cause
wonderful.
This is the realness of the situation we are all in, and we know you're stepping in for Chair Lilligren. So thank you for your service.
Well, he gave me plenty of notice. Lisa gave me thorough preparation and notes. And I spent a great deal of time today working on this, and you'd think I'd have it together. It's probably better when I don't have notice and I don't prepare. So anyway, our consent agenda, we're going to, unless there's objection, we're going to vote on 2020-318, 2021 payment standards for Metro HRA rent assistance programs.
Madam Chair, I'd move the consent agenda. Johnson.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson, second.
Lindstrom will second that one.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom. Any discussion? Hearing none. Michelle, will you take roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Bento. Atlas Ingebrigtsen,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf. Councilmember Wolf?
Oh, I said aye, sorry.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear you. Thank you.
Okay, that motion carries. We'll move on to the non-consent agenda. Items. Our first is 2020-307, JT City of Andover 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan Review File, presented by Michael Larson.
Good afternoon, Chair Vento and members of the committee. It's good to see you again. Michael Larson, Planning Analyst and Sector Representative in the Local Planning Assistance Group in the Community Development Division. Before you today, as you said, is the review of the City of Andover's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. I'd first like to thank the significant efforts of the city in developing the city's comprehensive plan and working with us through to completion. They include the city's Community Development Director, Joe Janish, and City Planner Peter Helligers. Next slide, please. So this map reflects figure 1 of the staff report and identifies the location of regional system components within the city of Andover. The city includes both Bunker Hills and Rum River Central Regional Parks, as well as the regional trails of Central Anoka and Rum River. Andover does not have any principal arterial roadways within the city, but is proximate to both US Highway 10 to the south and Trunk Highway 65 to the east. Wastewater generated within the city is conveyed by Council Interceptor 7035 to the Metropolitan Council's wastewater treatment plant in St. Paul. Next slide, please. So figure 2 shows that Andover is located, as most of you probably know, in central Anoka County. It's surrounded by the cities of Oak Grove, East Bethel, Ham Lake, Blaine, Coon Rapids, Anoka, and Ramsey. The city has 3 community designations, including the Emerging Suburban Edge designation shown in yellow, where continued urbanization is planned. Rural residential shown in light green, which is for the foreseeable future, rural residential densities. Diversified rural shown in the center of the community in darker green. And this diversified rural designation is consistent with the council's post-2040 wastewater long-term service area. So this would be post-2040 urbanization in this location. Next slide, please. As shown in table 1 of your staff report, city and council staff have agreed on a downward revision of the households and population forecast, reflecting what we both see as a more limited housing capacity in the urbanizing portion of Andover. Also, council and city staff agreed on an upward revision of employment, reflecting growth that has outpaced our expectations. So between 2020 and 2040, the council now forecasts that the city will grow by 6,300 people, 2,700 households, and 800 jobs. Next slide, please. Table 2 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density in that urbanizing emerging suburban edge portion of the city. The overall density for guided residential land in this area is expected to be between 3 and 5 units per acre, which is exactly what communities with an emerging suburban edge designation under Thrive are expected to plan for new development and redevelopment. Next slide, please. Andover is primarily a residential community with established urban and rural neighborhoods. It became a city in 1976, with much of its growth occurring from the 1970s through 2000. More recent growth, however, has been at a slower pace. The city is only partially developed, with 51% of its land undeveloped or agriculture. Residential uses are shown in yellow, with large lots in the rural residential northern part of the city and urbanized lots in the emerging suburban edge southern portion of the city. Commercial and industrial uses represent a small 2% portion of the land area, and the largest concentrations you can see is located in the south central part of the city near the intersection of Bunker Lake Boulevard and Hanson Boulevard. Next slide, please. Figure 4 of the staff report identifies the guiding land uses for the city. Communities with a rural residential designation under Thrive are expected to discourage future development of rural residential patterns, and where opportunities exist, plan for rural development at densities that are not greater than 1 unit per 10 acres. This part of the city is shown as the large swath of tan across the northern part of the city. Communities with a diversified rural designation are expected to plan for growth not to exceed forecasts and patterns that exceed 4 units per 40 acres. This part of the city is shown in blue-gray in the center, and Andover's plan is consistent with these policies. In the emerging suburban edge portion of city, which is shown on your map in the dashed red outline, the plan identifies areas for urbanization with densities and policies that are also consistent with council policies. And the largest inventory of land, as is evidenced by the map, is guided as urban residential low, with a minimum density of 2.4 units per acre. Additional acreage guided at higher densities results in an overall minimum density of 3 units per acre, as shown in the previous slide. Next slide, please. The proposed findings for you today is that the Andover's comprehensive plan conforms to metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies with the proposed revisions, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units in affected jurisdictions. Next slide, please. On Tuesday, November 10th, Environmental Services staff will present to the Environment Committee, and this will be on the council's full agenda on December 9th. Next slide, please. We have the proposed action for you today is to authorize the city of Andover to place its comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the city's forecast downward, as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record, to revise the city's affordable housing need allocation for 2021 to 2030 to 362 units, and to advise the city to implement advisory comments in the review record for TAZ allocations, local water management plan, and local water supply plan. And that next slide, and that completes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Is there anyone from the city here with us tonight? Do you know? By chance?
Madam Chair, I have not heard. I don't believe so, but I'd ask them to make themselves known if that's the case.
Okay, just checking. I just want to make sure if there is that we thank them. Questions or comments from the committee members? Any questions or comments? I don't see any virtual or actual hands. So with that, is there a motion to approve? Don't be shy.
Wolf moves approval.
Wolf moves approval. Is there a second?
Cummings second.
Cummings seconds. No further discussion? Seeing none, Michelle, if you would take roll.
Yes, Chair Vento. Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Mr. Larson is back with a presentation on 2020-308 JT, City of Circle Pines 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm still Michael Larson, Planning Analyst and Sector Representative in the Local Planning Assistance Group in the Community Development Division. Before you today is the review of the City of Circle Pines 2040 Comprehensive Plan. I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of the city, including their Assistant City Administrator, Chandra Peterson, as well as their consultant, Aaron Perdue at WSB. Okay, we're on the regional systems slide, and this map reflects figure 1 of your staff report and identifies the location of regional system components within Circle Pines. Regional trails located in the city include the East Anoka County and Rice Creek North regional trails. There are no, like with Andover, there are no principal arterial roadways in the city, but 35W is accessible via one interchange with Lexington Avenue and 2 interchanges at either end of Lake Drive, just outside of the city. Wastewater generated within the city is conveyed by a single interceptor with treatment also at the Metropolitan treatment plant in St. Paul. Next slide, please. Circle Pines is located in southern Anoka County, and it is surrounded by the communities of Lino Lakes, Shoreview, Blaine, and Lexington. Figure 2 from the staff report identifies the city with a suburban community designation consistent with Thrive MSP 2040. Next slide, please. City and council staff have agreed on a forecast revision to this plan as well, reflecting the fact that Circle Pines is a fully developed community and has limited potential for additional households and jobs. Table 1 also in your staff report shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council now forecasts that the city will grow by 250 people, 140 households, and 50 jobs. Next slide, please. Table 2 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density in the city. The overall density for guided residential land is expected to be between 6.4 and 14.1 units per acre. Communities with the suburban community designation under Thrive are expected to plan for growth at overall minimum densities of 5 units per acre for new development and redevelopment, and Circle Pines is consistent with this policy. Next slide, please. The city of Circle Pines is just under 2 square miles. Settlement of the area in the 1940s began, interestingly, as a planned cooperative community, but was a relatively short-lived venture. A remnant of that cooperative is Centennial Utilities, a cooperative that continues today. It is based in Circle Pines and provides a full range of services to the city's residents, as well as natural gas service to Lionel Lakes and Blaine customers as well. Large-scale development of the community began in the 1950s, with the majority of this city developed by the 1990s. Residential areas now account for 49% of the land area. Park, open water, and recreational areas account for a significant 44% of the city, including land that is part of the Rice Creek North Regional Trail Corridor, as you can see in green in the eastern and southern portions of the city. Commercial uses along Lake Drive, which run southwest northeast, constitute only, northeast, southwest, again, my cardinal directions right there. Those constitute only 2% of the city. So next slide, please. The city's future land use map refers to figure 4 in the staff report here. Lake Drive, once again, is the main thoroughfare in the city, running at an angle across the city. Most of the city's higher density residential uses, as well as its commercial and institutional uses, are located along its extent. It is also the location of most of the opportunities for new growth as mixed-use redevelopment. Lower density residential uses and open space are predominant elsewhere in the city. Next slide, please. So the proposed staff findings for you today is that the plan conforms to Metropolitan system plans. It is consistent with housing policies with proposed forecast revisions, except for housing in one specific instance. We find that the plan is substantially consistent with housing policy. It does not currently address the preservation of projects that use the low-income housing tax credit. It is the city's, we understand that it's the city's intention to make this modification to the plan. The city does have 2 properties representing 90 units of housing financed with this tool. So this is simply a modification rather than policy concern. So this is something we would expect for the final submission. And finally, the plan is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units in affected jurisdictions. Next slide, please. On Tuesday, December 8th, Environmental Services staff will present to the Environment Committee, and this will be on the Metropolitan Council's agenda at its December 16th meeting. Next slide, please. A proposed action for you today is to authorize the City of Circle Pines to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the city's forecasts as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record, revise the affordable housing need allocation for the city to 12 units, and to strongly encourage the city to address all widely known tools in order to be fully consistent with council housing policy. The city should consider addressing the following tool in the plan before final adoption, to identify the preservation of projects that use the low-income housing tax credit, which, as I mentioned, they intend to do. And the last action is to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for wastewater, housing, and water supply. Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Lindstrom.
Thank you, Chair. Michael, you may have mentioned this. I heard you talk about the trails. I'm aware that there's a missing link in the Rice Creek North Regional Trail in Circle Pines that they recently, I think they recently received $500,000 to start the process of fixing that. I assume that's addressed in the comp plan. Is that right? The missing link?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, I cannot say for sure, but I'm assuming that it is. I did not do the parks review. I expect that to be the case. If there's anyone who's familiar with that and park staff online, it's certainly give me the heads up. That's something I can follow through, but that's something that we would identify as any planned pieces, planned elements of the regional trail system. And I could probably do a control F in the plan right now if you give me 5 minutes.
Anyone else? Questions or comments? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Second
Madam
motion.
Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom. And who seconds?
Lee.
Lee. So Councilmember Lindstrom moves, Councilmember Lee seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Michelle, please take the roll.
Yes, Chair Vento, I'd be happy to. Atlas Ingebrigtsen,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, we have agenda item 2020-309JT, the City of Ramsey 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan, presented by Eric Wychek. Mr. Wychek.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Vento and members of the committee. Can everybody hear me okay, I hope? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, great. My name is Eric Wychek, as Chair Vento mentioned, and I am a planning analyst in local planning assistance in the Community Development Division at the Council. I serve districts 2, 9, and 10 within local planning assistance. I'd like to let the committee know that Tim Gladhill, the City of Ramsey's Community Development Director, is here with us tonight. And I just wanted to extend my heartfelt thanks to him and his team for working so hard on this plan over the last couple of years. We worked very closely with them on this, and it's a huge triumph to be at this point. So I'm very happy for them. Next slide, please. So this map reflects figure 1 of the staff report and identifies the location of regional system components within the City of Ramsey. In terms of parks and trails, we have the Rum River Central and Mississippi West Regional Parks and the Central Anoka and Mississippi River Regional Trails. In terms of transportation elements, we have within the current revenue scenario, identification of right-of-way preservation needs, and this includes the construction of an interchange and rail grade separation at Trunk Highway 10 at Armstrong Boulevard. The plan also includes a Highway 10 access planning study. For wastewater components, we have 2 interceptors that serve the city, and those treat wastewater at our Metro plant in St. Paul. And the plan also includes the North Star commuter rail station, which is a major transit feature within the city. Next slide, please. Figure 2 from the staff report identifies the city as emerging suburban edge. Community designation consistent with Thrive MSP 2040. Ramsey is located along the western border of Anoka County. It is surrounded by the communities of Nowthen, Oak Grove, Andover, Anoka, Champlain, Dayton, and Rogers. Next slide, please. Table 1, also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the revised council forecasts show that the city will grow by 11,600 people, representing 3,900 households. There will be an increase of 1,500 jobs in the city in the same time frame. The city was very interested in a forecast revision upward because they have seen a lot of growth over the last few years. They're actually the second fastest growing city in Anoka County, so a lot of development, which is great. Next slide, please. Table 3 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density in the emerging suburban edge areas of the city. The overall density for guided residential land is expected to be between 3.2 and 6.3 units per acre. Communities with the emerging suburban edge designation under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at an overall average minimum density of between 3 and 5 units per acre for new development and redevelopment. Ramsey's plan is consistent with this policy. Next slide, please. The city's existing land use map refers to figure 3 in the staff report. The existing land uses in the city of Ramsey are predominantly residential at 40% and undeveloped land at 29%. In the majority of the commercial, industrial, and institutional uses are near transportation corridors and are within the center of Ramsey or core area of the city. Approximately 10% of the city consists of parks and open space. Next slide, please. The city's future land use map refers to figure 4 in the staff report. Future residential land uses categories include low density residential, medium density residential, high density residential, and mixed use. The latter land use of mixed use carries a residential share of 50%. And the mixed use category includes subcategories of mixed use low, mixed use medium, and mixed use high. And all of these are within that center of Ramsey planning area, which is called the core area. And I'd like to add too that the city of Ramsey has been very proactive over many years of planning this area, which is near the transit, near the North Star station. And they've been very successful in their planning efforts. Within the unsewered portions of the city, primarily in the northwest, central, and northeastern portions of the city, the plan guides land at low densities with the rural developing land use at 1 unit per 10 acres to allow for future expansion of urban services where appropriate. The rural developing land use recognizes existing development within this land use at 1 unit per 2.5 acres while seeking to transition lower density rural land to sewer development where minimum densities for urban services can be achieved. The plan requires that residential development within a half a mile of the North Star commuter rail station is guided as mixed use will be developed at a net minimum density of 15 units per acre. And the city will be tracking the 15 units per acre minimum density through the council's plat monitoring program. Plan densities for areas identified for redevelopment in the station area within the city are consistent with the minimum density required in the transportation policy plan. Next slide, please. Council staff proposed the following findings. The plan conforms to Metropolitan system plans. The plan is consistent with council policies with the proposed forecast revision. And the plan is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units in affected jurisdictions. Next slide, please. On Tuesday, December 8th, the Environmental Services staff will present to the Environment Committee. This item will be on the Metropolitan Council agenda at the December 16th meeting. And next slide, please. And council staff recommend the following actions. I have added an action here in bold, and this is not reflected on in your staff report, and that's why it's in bold here. And we would like to add this as it goes forward to council. And the reason for this added action is that the city has expressed interest in approving its plan contingent on council approval. And we just want to be very clear. We've worked with our legal staff on this to make sure that the plan meets the requirements of statute, which is why this action was added. So council staff recommend that the council take the following actions, which is to authorize the city of Ramsey to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the city's forecast upward as shown in table 2 and table 3 of the review record, and advise the city that per statute, resolutions adopting comprehensive plans cannot be based on contingent approval by the Metropolitan Council. Minnesota Statute Section 473.585, Subdivision 3 states, comprehensive plans shall be submitted to the council following recommendation by the planning agency or the unit and after consideration, but before final approval by the governing body of the unit. Submission of an adopting resolution inconsistent with state statute may jeopardize the city's access to necessary permits or eligible grant programs. Next slide, please. So these proposed actions are continued. We also advise the city to adopt the MERCA plan within 60 days after receiving final DNR approval and submit a copy of the final adopted plan to the DNR, the Council and National Park Service within 10 days after adoption. And when available, provide the council the date the city adopted the final local water management plan and a copy of the final adopted local water management plan sent to the council, and then implement the advisory comments in the review record for land use, water supply, and plan implementation. And I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
So committee members, you did receive a letter from Mr. Gladhill via Lisa Barajas. And as Mr. Wycheck indicated, this has been reviewed by our legal counsel. It's also been reviewed by Chair Lilligren and Chair Zelli and the staff. And we deeply respect and understand the city of Ramsey's desire to get this moving, but because of statutes and policies and procedures that we follow as a council, we're not in the position of waiving or altering the process. But comments or questions by the committee members? Anyone? Okay. Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the comprehensive 2040 plan for the city of Ramsey?
Wolf moves approval.
Wolf moves approval, and a second?
Johnson seconds.
Johnson seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify. Oh, excuse me? Councilmember Chambliss.
Councilmember, thank you.
Oh,
yes, I just wanted to respond and acknowledge City of Ramsey's letter asking for consideration to move this forward and get it approved, and that in good faith they will come back with updates to the city council on any additional information or requirements.
I think we can count on that, and I want Mr. Gladhill and the city of Ramsey to know that the council staff will work the community development staff, especially Eric Wycheck, will work closely with them to help with this process. We know it makes it cumbersome for you, but it's the result of those statutes and policies and procedures. So thank you, Councilmember Chambliss, for making that comment. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please, or Michelle, please take the roll.
Yes, Chair Vento. Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Before we go on, I want to just do a shout out to all the staffs of all three of the cities for whom we've approved comprehensive plans tonight, as well as the community development staff who work with them. This is an enormous amount of work, and we really appreciate what everyone does to make this happen. So thank you. Again, we want to work with you, and we'll do our best. Moving on to the next agenda item, number 6, 2020-312. This is a same week item. This is the amending of the 2020 Annual Livable Communities Fund Distribution Plan. Lisa Barajas will be making this presentation. So, Director Barajas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I'm here before you with a proposed amendment to the 2020 Livable Communities Fund Distribution Plan. I promise my presentation is short, although the journey to get here has been longer than I had wished. Next slide, please. So this is an illustration of the course of events described in the staff report over the course of this year that led to this point. As you may recall, when you discussed and adopted your 2020 budget last summer and into December, with that final adoption, you included $1 million in that budget to address homelessness in the region. And the intent was originally to contribute those funds to a collaborative fund that would leverage private donations to the fund as well. So December, after you had made your adoption, the state of Minnesota launched the Minnesota Winter Homeless Initiative that included that private-public partnership. And then in January, they solicited applications and made awards for programming funds to right out of that program for Minnesota Winter Homeless Initiative. The intent was to make a second round of philanthropic asks to support capital funds, which is what the council was focused on leveraging additional funds to build permanent affordable housing. So in March, the council approved a partnership with the Minnesota Housing to support the Minnesota Winter Homeless Initiative, and we were about to get underway with executing our joint powers agreement to move funds into this particular round and do our next round of philanthropic donations and solicitation for project requests when COVID-19 came about and threw a whole level of uncertainty into the private sector and philanthropic foundation sectors about whether they would have funds to donate at that time. So that joint collaborative fund kind of fizzled out. That being said, there were a number of federal actions that had been taken through the CARES Act to fund a number of other programs to the state. I should say not programs, but broad uses that the state could consider. Funds were distributed to the state through CARES Act, and council staff worked with state agency staff to navigate and figure out whether we could create a new fund out of the funds there in order to leverage opportunities given the lemons that were thrown at us, and to see whether we can make some lemonades out of that. Long story short is that despite a lot of investigation, we just weren't able to find a pathway that would either meet the intended purpose of the funds that was in the original business item for this action, or do so in a manner that would be expeditious, as in we probably wouldn't be distributing funds until sometime late into next year. So that's what brings me to our action today. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a reminder before I get into that, the proposed use of funds, and this is outlined in the staff report as well, were to support capital projects that would be located in the 7-county metro area, be small scale in nature, provide housing units that are affordable to households with incomes at that lowest income level of 30% AMI or less, that would be low barrier entry for residents, that would provide culturally specific and appropriate living spaces and supportive services, and that could commence construction in the next 6 months, as well as accept housing choice vouchers. So in this process of looking at what other paths would be available to us, council staff also looked at applications that were currently submitted in the solicitation for the local housing incentives account, a process that we run in collaboration with Minnesota Housing, or I should say opposite, Minnesota Housing runs in collaboration with us. And we were finding that not only were there a number of projects that we were already willing to fund in this, but there were other additional projects in the metro area that we could fund outside of the initial allocation of $4.5 million to the LHIA account. Tara Beard is on our Livable Communities manager is also on this call today. So if you wanted to learn a little bit more about that, those applications in the pipeline, she's happy to answer any questions about those. But we felt it would be most expedient to move that $1 million to the local housing incentives account and fund those applications that we are already seeing in that particular solicitation this year. Should you choose to take that pathway, you would see actions before you later in December and or potentially early January. Tara can correct me, I might have that a little bit off, to make awards out of the local housing incentives account. So next slide, please. So the proposed action before you is that the Metropolitan Council revise the 2020 Annual Livable Communities Fund Distribution Plan to increase the funding availability for the local housing incentives account by $1 million. I should also make note that part of this action would be accompanied by the operating budget amendment that is next on your agenda, a portion of which would then do the housekeeping work of moving that $1 million from its current location in our budget to the local housing incentives account portion of the budget. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Questions or comments from the committee members? Councilmember Johnson and then Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Barajas, for the report. So again, this is the $1 million that we, I think we were the first in money during the homeless initiative coming up on a year ago. And so just so I mean, it's clear, but so we were never able to expend it at all. Was everything halted? Did even the private funds get halted, or did the whole initiative have to just go on major pause? Was that the outcome, or was it more about not being able to expend all of the funds or facilitate it appropriately because of COVID?
Madam Chair, council members, that's a really good question. The first round of solicitation that Minnesota Winter Homeless Initiative had was for programming or for operations, essentially. And so the private dollars that they solicited were leveraged, and then applications were taken and dollars were put already dispersed to applicants. The intent was to do a second round of philanthropic solicitation and use our $1 million to leverage additional philanthropic and private sector dollars. And right when we were about to do that next step, that's when COVID really threw the capital portion phase of that initiative out of whack.
And Madam Chair, just one follow-up. And then, so thank you for that, which is just such a bummer, right? Because of everything. So then we'd be able to, just redirect this into all of the things that we've prioritized, originally, I think for the money. And because we're partnering with Minnesota Housing, will it help leverage other money, or will it help, I guess, expand the reach, the $1 million that we're putting in?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Johnson, that's correct. And Tara certainly can speak a little bit more to that. But, with the funds that Minnesota Housing has available and the original funding that we have available, always adding more allows us to fund more. But Tara can speak a little bit more to some of the kind of whose dollars go where aspect of funding projects as well.
And Madam Chair, if I may, just bear with me one more question. And so I know that recently too, when we are our kind of housing policy work group, we talk about, recently working to maybe put Met Council money in first rather than tagging on the backside or along with Minnesota Housing. So this would be more the traditional route like we've done before, where we work with Minnesota Housing rather than plugging holes maybe where projects didn't quite get the funding through partnership with Minnesota Housing. Seems like we had, tried to move in that track a little bit, but this would be more the traditional route with that. I'm probably not saying it correctly, but I think maybe you get the gist of my question.
Go ahead, Tara.
Madam Chair, is that okay? All right.
Absolutely.
Everyone can hear me? Great. Tara Beard, Manager of Livable Communities, Councilmember Johnson, members of the committee, Madam Chair. I would say that there was a little bit of a difference. Normally when we work with Minnesota Housing on our LHIA recommendations, we really do kind of defer to their kind of initial run through and underwriters and just sophistication of their system and their staff to kind of figure out all the different sources of funding for affordable housing that they have and those limitations. And then we sort of say, okay, this is what's kind of left that is eligible for LHIA funds. What are our priorities amongst what is left? And how can we kind of make choices in that way? With this additional funding, with such a kind of specific preference of how the money was spent, we were actually, it was still kind of after the first round of kind of like these projects aren't likely to move forward, but we were much more proactive about saying, regardless of kind of whether or not you had this already fully funded, we're really interested in this project. And so we started those conversations, and it ended up being, I can't say much about projects or anything like that specifically, but it ended up being a really, really good fit of a project that wasn't looking like it was going to quite cut it, that got kind of a new look based on this additional funding. And so it was actually a really, given the strange circumstances, I'm really excited about the project we're going to be able to recommend funding for using this money.
Councilmember Chambliss, Committee Member Chambliss.
Thank you. I really appreciate the explanation and the questions from Councilmember Johnson. This money will be, if we pass this, that means the money will pass through for grant agreements and provide more support to resolve the winter homelessness issue. And having already started this process, it's nice that we can move this forward, even though we're not getting all the private funds, and still be able to meet the goals to expand support for homelessness. So that is great. Just this week, I received a call from a woman who wanted help. She said she had a housing voucher, and she and her 5 children were homeless and living in the car. It's too cold for that. So whatever we can do as Metropolitan Council to provide support during this critical time in the winter, I'm definitely supportive of it. And I'm glad that we had the foresight to be ready to help and that we have the opportunity to pass these funds through. So thank you to our staff for bringing this to us. And I know and I'm sure all of the committee members are going to be happy that we have this opportunity to support. Thank you.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I recall, when this was first coming together, and it came together really, really quickly, and as Councilmember, Committee Member Johnson said, I think we were the first million in, and we were proud to acknowledge that, rightfully so. And I think the goal was to raise $4.5 or $5 million or $5 million. We got 4.5 like almost immediately. It came in so quickly, which is terrific. And the idea was that the money would come in and it would go out really quickly. It wasn't going to be, we weren't going to be sitting on it. I don't mean we as the Met Council, but in general, the fund was not going to be sitting on it. The idea was get the money in, get the money out, and help those in need. So I'm curious about how much of that initial $4.5 million was actually spent according to the goals of the way the project was initially set up. And I'm kind of curious, when did we realize that the Met Council $1 million wasn't going to work the way that we had initially intended?
Lisa or Tara, one of you want to take the question, please?
Sure, Madam Chair, Councilmember Cummings. My recollection, it's been a little while since I've seen the full list now, is that nearly all, if not all of the $4.5 million was dispersed to project applicants for programming and operations purposes. And you're right, it moved very quickly. Reviewed and moved out the door. And there was a whole list of additional applications that were not funded, most of which were operations, but some of which included some capital. So we were looking for that in second round, as I had noted, of additional capital dollars from the private sector to support that, so we could put out a second solicitation to be sure there was more. So it was probably around April or so. It was obviously after the action I brought before you in March, when we came to the conclusion that we were not going to be able to get additional private sector dollars to leverage into this fund. And right around that time was when Federal CARES Act was also being passed. And so that was a pathway that we were exploring with Minnesota Housing to see what the potential, what the possibilities would be, if there were any at that time.
Yeah.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. Thank you for that, that explanation. That helps put all these pieces together over a weird year and kind of remember how it started and then how it was executed. So it's a great program, and I'm glad that we have that money available and can use it because it advances, again, the goals of this council on many, many levels. And so thank you for the team's work on this. It's amazing how you can pivot as quickly as you do in these very unusual circumstances and say, okay, that, not that, but this, and still reflect the values of the council. So thank you for your work on that.
Tara, yes.
Hey, Madam Chair, thanks. Just one other fact that I think maybe Councilmember Cummings was asking about, maybe not, but it's good to share anyway. The project that we would be using this funding to support was not being looked at for LHIA funding until we started considering this additional $1 million. So I'm not sure if that was exactly what we were getting at somewhere in those questions, but for some reason my brain told me it was, so I wanted to share that.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve? Wendy, do you have a comment, or do you want to make the motion?
I still have a question, if that's okay. I was letting other people get theirs out before fighting to put my hand up. So it's kind of an in the weeds question, but it has come to my attention in the past year that there are some communities who keep back a portion of Livable Communities grants for the city. They take a cut off of the top for grants that are approved in their community. And I just want to make sure that all of that money is actually going to go to a project and make sure that it's not going to be skimmed off of the top.
Tara.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Wolf, yes, to my knowledge, there's only one participating city that does charge an administrative fee, but they do charge that fee in addition to the whole grant amount. So even for that community, if there was, for example, a $100,000 LHIA award, they would require that they would provide that entire $100,000, but then require a $7,000 payment for administrative fees. So it's a little detail, but technically they don't take $7,000 out of a $100,000 award. Technically they charge it in addition to that award, but that doesn't necessarily change the intent, but point of clarification. And that's not the city that this project is located in that we're thinking about using this money for.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
I'm so sorry, Madam Chair. And again, just a clarification. So this $1 million will be, and I think I missed the last housing working group. I'm sorry. So if this was already discussed, I don't know. But this will be one project though that receives it. Is that correct? It won't be split up. Is that I think that's what you said.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Johnson, I'm glad you asked the clarifying question because the one kind of unique challenge to moving the money in this way is that suddenly that local match requirement that's in statute for LHIA is triggered. And so the project that we are looking at recommending a significant portion of this funding toward did not have enough local match to put the full $1 million toward it. However, there was another project that we were already looking at funding that we can add additional funding to that also meets the criteria that the initial $1 million was intended for. So we're actually going to be, and it's tricky because we're still kind of sending spreadsheets back and forth with Minnesota Housing and finalizing numbers. So it's difficult to say anything for certain. But I think when you see the recommendations on January 4th, to answer Lisa's earlier point, we'll be able to explain more clearly. But certainly a full $1 million is being used for two projects is what we'll be recommending that both meet the intent of the source of funds.
And Madam Chair, and thank you for that clarification. And you answered my second thought, was that it will come back to us again for final disbursement through the process. Okay, great. You can hear my dogs, so they're very excited about this as well.
I'm surprised my dog hasn't joined in, Councilmember Johnson, except that he's asleep on my feet. Any other questions? Okay, seeing and hearing none, do we have a motion to approve? Oh, we don't need a motion to approve. We just need a roll call. Yes, we do need a motion to approve. Folks, I'm having a really bad night, and I don't know what this is about. But anyway, bear with me.
Good. Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson moves to approve.
Thank you. Do we have a second and a third and a fourth?
Chambliss seconds.
Okay, Chambliss seconds. Thank you both. Michelle, if you'll take the roll, please.
Yes, Chair Vento. Atlas Ingebretson.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great, motion carried. Just as a reminder, in 24 minutes, the IMPAS members are going to join us for a joint meeting regarding public comments on the 2019 update to the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan. So we've got 24 minutes to cover two more items here. And I know that I've challenged this agenda by my messing things up here, so thank you for bearing with me. Agenda item number 7, 2020-305, the 2020 budget amendment for the November operating budget amendment. Heather Augustin-Hubner. Heather, we're turning it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so Heather Augustin-Hubner, Finance Director for Community Development. I'm here before you for the last budget amendment of the year. I'll keep my comments pretty tight because I know you're on a tight timeline, and feel free to ask questions if I don't cover all the details that you're looking for. So the first item that we're doing is basically, so the three-leg stool on the livable communities is the policy direction where you just had the conversation. The second leg of that stool is this budget amendment will move the money to the LHIA program, to the pass-through account. And then the third leg of that stool will happen later with the actual grant award that you'll do. So one of the things that you'll see in the operating budget is we're actually moving that $1 million that Lisa and Tara just talked to you about. The second item in the budget amendment is really a cleanup item. We have in the local planning, we have multi-year grant awards. And every year at the beginning of the year, we do our best to say, hey, this is how much money we think our subrecipients are going to spend in a given year. Well, they've spent more this year, so we're asking to just transfer some money from the reserves that are dedicated to this purpose to the 2020 authorized budget. And the third item that we're asking to do is to bring in some additional federal money for the Metro HRA program. So we got additional federal CARES money, and I think you've heard from Terry before that we got a handful of additional housing vouchers, and along with those comes additional money. So what we're doing before you is we're essentially bringing that money into the authorized budget this year. Some of that is going to reserves that you will likely see us bring forward in a future budget amendment. And I just want to note, we normally wouldn't bring money into reserves. We kind of let that sit and bring it into the next budget amendment. The situation that we find ourselves in is we found out about this additional federal CARES Act money about 24 to 36 hours before this budget amendment needed to be landed. So one of the things that we've got to do internally is we're still having conversations about the strategy for what color of money to spend. Do we spend our base HRA appropriation or the federal CARES Act first? We're going to spend all the money. It's just we're still working on the order. So that's why you are seeing us, you're seeing a reserve amount building in the HRA, and you typically wouldn't see that. So from a Thrive perspective, this is really supporting housing. It is providing safe environments for people, and it's helping us move forward, really planful stewardship of the region's financial resources. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? No questions. Is there a motion to approve?
Wolf moves approval.
Wolf moves approval. And who would like to second?
Cummings seconds.
Okay, Councilmember Wolf moves, Councilmember Cummings seconds. Michelle, if you take the roll, please.
Yes, Chair Vento. Yes. Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye, and I do need to comment. I'm having that little thing put the words at the bottom, what people say, and it's hilarious watching the different things it translates Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen's name into.
Technology can provide humor at a time when we need it most. That motion carried. Thank you. Our next item is in the information section, 2021 Livable Communities Act program scoring criteria. Tara Beard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, everybody, my name is Tara Beard, and I manage the Livable Communities programs in community development at the Met Council. And I am just kind of blown away that I'm here again. I feel like it was yesterday that I was 2 weeks into this position, trying to figure out how do you talk about scoring criteria with the Community Development Committee in my new job. So I'm blown away that we're here again, but we are. We are at the beginning of a couple conversations we'll have leading up to an adoption of scoring criteria that will guide the selection process for 2021 Livable Communities Act programs. Next slide, please, Craig. And specifically, today's discussion, it's going to be fairly high level. We're going to talk about specific criteria in December, but for now, we're talking about some more structural, broader organizational changes that we're proposing. First, I'm going to share with you a timeline for the adoption of the scoring criteria, and then I'm going to remind us all of the statutory and policy guidance that tells us how to approach scoring criteria determination. Then I'm going to share the results of a lot of 2020 evaluation work that the team has been working on in terms of scoring criteria and how it's working in the program. And that's one of those things that I didn't have the capacity to do prior to coming before you a year ago. So it's been a really exciting year of digging in and learning more. So I'm excited to share some of those findings with you all today. And finally, I'll share some recommendations. Again, only high-level recommendations. We'll be back with more specific scoring criteria to chew on in December, but some high-level recommendations for your feedback and consideration. We won't be making any sort of decisions today, but we're trying to kind of have the conversation in steps so that when it's time to put forward final recommendations, we have folks all feel like they are ready to talk about it, or to vote upon it, should I say. So next slide, please. So here's that timeline. Today is November 16th, and we're talking about scoring criteria at a very high level, looking for discussion and direction from the committee on anything else we need to consider or if we're on the right track. On December 21st, I'll be joined by Councilmember Chambliss, who has graciously agreed to co-present with me some specific criteria recommendations. And as Chair Vento mentioned earlier, Councilmember Chambliss is on the Council's Housing Work Group, and that work group has been working with staff tirelessly since June to help approach certain housing conversations and discussions, as well as Livable Communities Act work. Then on January 19th, Councilmember Chambliss and I will be back with final recommendations based on all those conversations for the adoption of scoring criteria for all the LCA programs in 2021, going on to the full council on January 27th. And I want to take a moment right now to just acknowledge that last year, and I think in previous years, often the conversation about funding awards for each of the LCA programs and scoring criteria were often packaged together in conversations for kind of a final adoption of them all in something called the fund distribution plan. And for a couple different reasons, one of which is certainly sort of simplicity and clarity. I'm going to be having those conversations with you all in parallel, but not in the same meeting. So I will be coming before you also in January and February to talk about approved budget allotments for the programs and potential reserve dollar amounts that we can consider to add for 2021 funding awards. But that will be those will be separate conversations from the scoring criteria. Next slide, please. So, and excuse me one moment. I apologize. A 6-year-old just turned on the TV in the next room and now I can't concentrate. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but I can hear it. Thank you. Okay, so what should guide our scoring framework when we prioritize programs through the Livable Communities Act? Well, we start with the Livable Communities Act statute, which is certainly what tells us that annually we look at a distribution of the funds based on criteria for project selection. And the Livable Communities Act also tells us that we need to look to our Metropolitan Development Guide to further refine that scoring criteria. And that's, of course, our Thrive MSP and its sister documents, such as that 2040 Housing Policy Plan. And that all kind of siphons down into a conversation with any other council priorities or, specific kind of things that, as long as they aren't in conflict with the Metropolitan Development Guide or the LCA statutes, can go into the scoring criteria. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the LCA team has been doing a lot of evaluation work. And one of the things we spent 2020 doing was looking at, and these are really the high level kind of evaluation questions we were looking at. There's some more specific ones that, again, I'll be bringing to you in December. But the high level questions we were looking to answer in 2020 was, is the scoring criteria clearly linked to the statutory guidance and Thrive MSP 2040? So does the scoring criteria kind of follow that upside down triangle that you saw in the previous slide? The second question was, are the point values in the scoring category accurately reflecting our scoring priorities? Are we accidentally double counting anywhere? Are we kind of aware of the higher scoring categories and what share of points they are contributing toward differentiating between projects? And then finally, we looked at, is the scoring criteria well defined? Is it easy to understand? And is it objectively measurable? One of the things I have learned in a serious way over this last year is that it is really fun to think of scoring criteria, and it is really hard to accept that sometimes because it isn't clearly defined, because it can't be objectively measured, because it can't be kind of equitably distributed in consideration of projects from across the region, it's probably not the right scoring criteria to further the project goals. So it's a really important thing to make sure that any criteria we're putting out there is understandable and can be measured in an effective way. Next slide, please. So the evaluation activities we partook in 2020 to answer those questions, or at least start answering those questions, was outreach and engagement, which I'll specify in a second, and then some internal data collection and analysis. So for outreach and engagement, we've had just dozens of conversations throughout the year. It's been amazing to learn so much about the program from so many different kind of perspectives of stakeholders. So we've had a couple of different meetings with Metro Cities and a participant city focus group that they helped facilitate. And it was comprised of members that had participated in an LCA review back in 2018 as well. So some really great input from folks that are well-versed in the program. An online survey to participating communities and development partners that we got over 100 responses to. Multiple meetings with the Land Use Advisory Committee, conversations with our Livable Communities Advisory Committee throughout the kind of scoring process this year with the LCDA and TOD programs. meetings with council staff that score applications. So step 1 scores for the LCDA and TOD programs are done by internal subject matter experts. So checking with them on how the criteria was helping them differentiate and evaluate projects. So many ad hoc conversations with participants, applicants, and other stakeholders that I couldn't even begin to count. And of course, multiple meetings with the Council Housing Work Group. Next slide, please. So what did we hear? This is really a summary of what we heard kind of most frequently and most consistently. It doesn't mean that there weren't a couple folks that maybe felt differently, but in all that broad outreach, these are some of the themes that we pulled out. There were, a decent chunk of communities that are still developing more suburban or exurban development patterned communities that feel they aren't competitive under the current scoring criteria. We heard a similar sentiment from smaller cities that don't have a lot of staff capacity, but still have development goals and are eligible for LCA funds. We definitely heard from folks that the criteria does not feel well defined, that it can allow a lot of subjectivity in the scoring, and that wasn't true across all the scoring criteria, but some key areas, which I'll get into in future slides. Actually, I'll get into in the next bullet, never mind. And that feeling of criteria not being well defined and allowing subjectivity largely was around conversations about the innovation and demonstration criteria in the scoring categories. And there was just a wide variety of kind of perspectives and ideas about what that even meant. So that was particularly unclear. And then finally, we just kind of heard folks say that they felt like the criteria told them it was that we want to see projects that do everything. And so this is actually kind of a paraphrase of a comment Councilmember Chambliss made in our housing work group, one of our housing work group sessions that really has rung true, which is that our scoring criteria should really communicate what kinds of projects we want to see. Someone should be able to read that scoring criteria and say, oh, this is what would compete in this program. Next slide, please. So, in addition to that, we did a lot of data collection and analysis in-house. So here's what we learned doing some of our own internal analysis. We learned that the trickiest scoring criteria to kind of get a well-defined kind of mutually understood definition of is also criteria that's not really linked to statute or council policy such as THRIVE. And again, that's speaking about the innovation and demonstration value components of the scoring criteria. And neither of these are individual criterion. These are both scoring categories that consist of multiple criterion that add up to a significant portion of the total points. So in 2020, 25% of the total points for LCDA came from innovation and demonstration value criteria. And I've sort of provided a couple of snippets of what some of those individual criterion talk about. So you see the innovation findings, new development concept, strategies, going beyond a conventional project and being a model of LCDA goals, which are many and complex. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, Greg, would you go back one? I didn't make one point that I think is important to make. Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize again that innovation and demonstration value are not derived from statute. The word innovation is brought up once in statute. It refers specifically to valuing innovative partnerships, which can absolutely continue to be kept in the scoring criteria. But innovation of a project generally, in terms of kind of something new and something never seen before, is not at all in the foundational purpose of the program. Neither is demonstration value. The D and LCDA, of course, is demonstration, but what demonstration value or what demonstration is meant by that is not defined. And how it's been used in scoring criteria has really been around, is a project doing something in a way that's never been done before? And is that replicable or something that can be taught to other communities? Again, these are great concepts. This is not to say that innovative projects or projects that demonstrate something new are not great and shouldn't be competitive for the program. But in terms of scoring criteria and a quarter of the points available to scoring criteria, it was a little interesting to discover that there was really no statutorily defined kind of concept for these facts. I think that the demonstration word in the statute is probably saying these funds are to demonstrate the LCA goals, which are really around housing, jobs, compact, efficient development, not necessarily the newest ways of providing that type of development. Though again, if you have a new way to do it and you're doing it, you would still be very competitive. Thanks, Greg. Next slide. So another kind of entire scoring category that we had a little bit of trouble with as we did our own internal analysis and aligned it with some of the conversations we'd had with folks was the concept of catalyst. And catalyst is really tricky because of how you measure it objectively or consistently. And I've provided the two criterion that in 2020 were used to score projects under the scoring category catalyst. And there is some language in statute that indicates that impact is looked at in that way. There is a part of the statute that talks about promoting private sector investment. But I think that if you look at the two scoring criteria we have here, you can see how challenging it could be to evaluate a project that may still be putting its funding together and may not have tenants if there's a commercial component, et cetera, how difficult it can be to differentiate between projects by looking at something like whether or not it will support wealth building, which is almost always only applicable if it's an ownership project, which we hardly ever see applications for, whether it is housing or jobs application, or measuring something that the proposed development project would catalyze additional efforts to further community development goals. And it's a lot to ask of a single development project to understand how it could possibly catalyze additional development around in that community. You know, we know COVID, we know interest rates, we know so many market forces can impact kind of development. And I think one thing we could say is that development tends to spur additional development, but then what do we have to sort of differentiate fairly across very different types of communities that are trying to do projects that are clearly meeting the fundamental principles of the LCA Act, but measuring potential private investment in this way was definitely one of those scoring criteria categories that were kind of difficult to feel like we had a shared understanding of and a clear way to evaluate. I do want to say that we do feel like we are still capturing that intent from statute and some other criteria, and we'll get into that specifically in December. So I don't want you all to interpret this as me saying, yep, it's mentioned in statute that we should, try to award projects that will incent private investment, but that we think we can address it in a different way than this sort of umbrella of catalytic kind of impact. And technically the word catalyst isn't in the statute, but I believe that's the part of statute that the catalyst criteria is addressing. And that was worth 10% of points for LCDA and 12% of points for TOD last year. Next slide, please. Actually, Greg, could you go forward 2 more slides? I ended up submitting this in the wrong order. Thank you. So what else did we learn from data collection and analysis? We learned that the scoring categories are numerous and can overlap in intent. So currently LCDA and LCDA TOD scoring tables each have 8 scoring categories under which multiple scoring criteria exist. And for example, in the TOD scoring criteria, there are categories that are named TOD design, transit accessibility, walkability and ridership, and TOD innovation and demonstration. And if you think those high-level categories are somewhat similar sounding, the same thing was sort of happening when you looked at the criteria underneath. So there really had become a potential for some double counting and just some lack of kind of clarity of how is the criteria organized, and is it organized in a way that we're sure what we're measuring about, where about what, in a really clear way. And this aligned with some feedback I got from staff as well and had in my own experience, which is that it is really challenging to provide feedback and technical assistance to communities that want to know why they weren't selected or how they can be more competitive when such large portions of the potential points come from things that are really hard to measure or describe how they're being evaluated. It doesn't mean that there aren't people out there that will tell you this is what demonstration value means, or this is what innovation means and why it's important. It's that there isn't a shared understanding or an objective way to really evaluate it, and it doesn't come from the foundational purpose of the program. My experience was in rescoring for project amendments. Projects would come back with some changes and we'd need to use our amendment process to review them. And it would be incredibly difficult to understand how to use the demonstration value or innovation criteria to understand how those scores would have changed given the changes to the project proposed. Now, Greg, if you could go back 2 slides, please. Thank you. So these next two slides, there's one last kind of data collection point that's really trying to look at the feedback we got from communities feeling like they weren't competitive for these programs. And so what you see here is a share of applications received since 2011 by community designation. And the number you see next to the community designation is the number of cities in that community designation that are also LCA participants. So I took out cities that may be suburban but aren't participating in livable communities programs. So obviously wouldn't apply. And so the quick and dirty here obviously is that the 10 urban core cities that participate in the program are submitting, in 2011 submitted 8 times as many applications. It's, essentially around 80 applications were submitted by those 10 cities. And there's just no other community designation that even kind of comes close to maximizing and taking advantage of the LCA programs. And that's completely understandable when you look at the size of those communities and the size of their staff and the capacity of their staff. But it's still worth noting when we're thinking about how to make sure this program is available and accessible to all the folks in the region that contribute to the funds and participate in the program. Next slide, please. If you take that urban core out of it so we can see a little bit more nuance in the other types of community designations, it's a little harder to sort of look at this and see exactly what's going on, although you can certainly see that rural centers, and we have 11 rural center communities that participate in LCA, that after a couple of applications in 2011 through 2014, we haven't seen any applications since 2014 for 11 of our participating rural centers. And you can see that the urban and suburban edge communities, I got to say, I do think that 2019 number for suburban edge may be a little bit of an outlier. But you can kind of see that 2015 through 17 lull, that's post-recession. And then communities that are pulling out of it look to be more the urban communities and possibly suburban edge, if that's not an outlier. But that the suburban and emerging suburban edge communities are really kind of struggling to pick back up to the level of participation and application numbers that we had from them about 10 years ago. And those suburban and emerging suburban edge communities are a lot of communities, 28, 29, depending on which year in the decade you're looking at participating, 18 in suburban edge. So, emerging suburban edge. So that's a big chunk of communities, again, that are really not applying very often. If you could go ahead 2 slides, Greg. We'll be back on track. I apologize. So all that talking at you led to kind of an approach to some kind of high-level foundational structural changes to consider in our scoring criteria that I would love your feedback on tonight. And the principles for those changes are to create clear alignment in the criteria with statute and Thrive priorities and policies, to improve accessibility of the program, both to smaller communities, but also to smaller development partners and new development partners in the region. To make sure that the scoring methodology is easy to understand and to simplify the application process, and definitely to remove repetition. Next slide, please. So with those principles in mind, the next few slides cover some recommendations that I'm hoping for feedback on. The first recommendation is to remove the innovation and demonstration scoring criteria. Again, this is not to say that innovative projects are not valued by the council or by LCA scoring criteria. And so innovative above and beyond projects, which is above and beyond is a frequent term I would hear from folks talking about the innovation criterion, they will still absolutely be competitive. It's just that what we'll be looking at is the impact of that innovation on the foundational purpose of the LCA priorities from statute and Thrive. There may be a few applicants or some longtime scorers that could question that change. I know there are some folks that feel very, very strongly that that the innovation and demonstration scoring criteria don't allow projects to sort of be humdrum projects, but really require high quality kind of design and innovation. Again, we are not looking to get low quality projects. We are just looking to stay clear with the policy intent, and instead of valuing sort of the new and exciting, value the foundational purpose of the program, which can be achieved through exciting new means or possibly more traditional means. And that goes a long way for including communities that don't have as much of an appetite or a capacity for innovative design features or innovative development practices. Next, I am proposing that we reorganize the scoring criteria into 3 kind of impact-related categories. So rather than these kind of high-level 8 criteria around various parts of the Livable Communities Act program and things like demonstration and innovation, we'd have 3 categories: a what, which looked at the proposed project impact; a how, looking at the proposed project process; and a who, looking at the proposed project team. Next slide, please, Greg. So zeroing in on the what and the proposed project impact, that is where the scoring criteria would reflect the outcomes prioritized by statute and Thrive. And that is, when we're talking about statute, it's truly accessible living wage jobs, housing choices with an emphasis on affordable housing, compact efficient development, and interconnectedness in the project area and across the region. And then there are Thrive principles such as sustainability, access to regional parks and trails, and enhanced quality of life, which are components of livability and prosperity, equitable development outcomes in the project area and across the region, equity. So there are certainly pieces of scoring criteria that do not necessarily have mention in statute, but they're very clearly defined and prioritized in Thrive, and that gives us what we need to use them in the scoring criteria to evaluate here. Next slide, please. For the how section of scoring category for proposed project process, this is how we would ensure that the projects prioritize equitable and meaningful engagement with the community, that the process that the project took to get to the point where they were applying for funds was rooted in equitable practices. There are going to be equity criteria proposed in all of the categories, but really the how section of category is entirely and intentionally focused on equity outcomes as currently proposed. This criteria would differentiate projects based on their outreach being centered towards those most affected and least represented or empowered. It would look at efforts to increase equitable access and inclusivity in less diverse parts of the region, so allowing for points for communities that are already very diverse and points for communities that aren't very diverse, but showing opportunities to enhance equitable development outcomes in both types of communities and everything in between. Also, it would look at understanding of inequitable development patterns in the project area and across the region, and an analysis of who benefits and how much throughout the project development. So those would be what the how section, as is currently drafted, would cover. Next slide, please. Who, or the proposed project team, would cover things like readiness for the project and capacity of both the city staff and the development partner, that the project could be completed in the grant terms that are required, and that the project team is reflective of or uniquely responsive to the community served by the project, especially centering those most impacted and least represented in the project area. Next slide. So this is a different version of the same slide that we started with, just to remind you that we will be back, Councilmember Chambliss and I, on December 21st to talk more specifically about the scoring criteria that was summarized in those last couple slides. I could feel myself having a hard time not starting to want to go into the weeds about some of them and what the scores are. And so I'm guessing maybe some of you will have questions, and I have to try to encourage you to stick to these high-level recommendations and just trust that we will be bringing specific scoring criteria for rich discussion on December 21st. We will also talk in a little bit more detail about development versus pre-development programs. And then on January 19th, we'd be bringing those final recommendations. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take a sip of water and take any questions or comments. But if nothing is coming to mind, we offer a couple of questions to just sort of get folks going. But I'm truly very excited to hear what you all think.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you to everyone involved in this. Before I call on anybody, I just want to throw out my own comment, and I just want to say that I find the clarity and the succinctness of the, it just all seems to fit. So I want to do a shout out. This feels very thoroughly thought out. Next, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thanks. I think this is such an important conversation, and I know that a lot of people have things that they want to share about this. I'm also really mindful that we have our commissioners on the call too, in a joint meeting that they were anticipating starting at 5:30. So I'm just trying to think about how do we do both of these things the best, and we don't lose that time we have with the MPOS commissioners.
will you as a committee be comfortable with us proceeding with the impasse portion and then coming back to this following that yet this evening? Okay.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, we will go ahead. Okay, Peter's given the thumbs up. Thank you. We will go ahead then and we will get the impasse folks all signed in. Emmett Mullen's going to facilitate this presentation to us tonight. So, and I think Chair Urusso is going to be with us too, correct? Mr. Mullen, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, Chair Vento and committee members. Thank you for having us today. And I'm sorry that we interrupted that last item, but I'm really appreciative of you being sensitive to the commissioners who are on the line. That's very good of you. So we're looking forward to this item today because this system additions process, the Regional Parks Policy Plan system additions process, we've been at it for over a year now, and we are coming into the final stages of making a recommendation. And we really appreciate you sharing your meeting with the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. So today, Tracy Kinney and I we'll be talking a little bit about the public comment summary and the process, and we'll end today's meeting with a brief request to you for your input on 2 items. So next slide, please. I did also mean to say that we have planned for about a 25 to 30-minute item, including that discussion. So here is our 3-point agenda today. The first is we just want to share a high-level summary of the public comments received during this process. And when I say high level, I mean that. Next, we want to share the public comment report, which was attached to our information item. It's quite a doozy. And it summarizes all the comments that we received during the public comment period. As you'll see, we've received a lot of comments. The public comment summary captures all the comments we received. We theme them into groups, and then we provide a staff response to that theme. Tracy Kinney, who's joining me in this presentation in just a minute, will share a summary of our engagement effort. And that engagement effort included a traditional engagement outreach, as well as we piloted some new ideas for this time. So we made it a real concerted effort based on your advice to reach out to non-traditional groups and audiences. So, and then finally, policy refinements. Today, I want to talk about 2 areas at the end of this presentation where we want your feedback. The first will be on the topic of bridging facilities. And then the second is regarding regional trail master planning and a new regional trail mapping requirement that we're proposing. So next slide, please. You've seen this timeline a few times, but I'm happy to tell you we're moving it down to the right here. We're at the very edge of the pink arrow where we are in the final refinement period of compiling, analyzing the ideas, and recommending final draft policy plan language. So we're about to complete that. And then after we get your input today, we'll bring a final recommendation through in December. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy Kinney and ask her to take the next slide. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Can you hear me? Thanks, Emmett. Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners, Councilmember. As you know, I am Tracy Kinney. I'm a senior planner in regional parks. And as Emmett mentioned, we are excited to bring you the public comment summary report. But first, I wanted to give you a brief overview of the public comment log. We received more than 190 comment submittals from 180 commenters. This is really exciting. You can see the list over to your left of who submitted. Now, some of these commenters provided multiple submittals, and some organizations provided multiple submittals by multiple people. And so they get organized slightly differently. But of the 180 commenters, we received a majority of them from residents. And of note, we received comments from both Dakota County and Three Rivers Park District. The public comments from the log were then organized by themes and responded to by staff. This formed the basis for the public comment summary report. Next slide, please. The public comment summary report organized the public comments into 24 themes, in total ranging from 24 themes. These themes ranged from system additions to regional trails to specific policy plan sections. Figure 1 in your business item shows all of the themes. New for this draft amendment are sections on the traditional engagement, demographic analysis, and public engagement pilot. These sections capture a summary of our engagement efforts for the draft amendment. Next slide, please. Some of our initial assumptions that formed our engagement was from CDC and MPOSC members. The guidance informed us that underserved populations should be prioritized as a way to increase equitable access to the regional park system, and that traditional engagement may not reach underserved populations. Staff was encouraged to innovate during the public comment period. Staff took up this challenge with a two-pronged approach, building on the traditional engagement that the council conducts and expanding on this engagement through the public engagement pilot. We built on the traditional methods of engagement through adding 3 different languages to the policy plan website, creative plain language stories to communicate the draft amendment. Use these stories to conduct a survey, and added a video challenge to host the host of other ways for people to comment. We also had a vibrant social media campaign. And then to increase equitable access to the draft amendment, staff piloted a new engagement process that prioritized underserved populations through extended outreach to organizations connected to parks and to youth. More on this later. Next slide, please. As part of the traditional engagement tools, we used a survey. New for this public comment period were demographics questions as part of the survey. Council staff added demographic questions to the survey to give us some insight into who was responding and where in the region they lived. We saw this as a great way to test the traditional method of engagement. This analysis does not capture the commenters from the public engagement pilot, and of course, not everyone responded to the survey. There were many other ways to respond. Only 137 commenters out of 180 commenters responded to the survey. That's right, that slide is incorrect. It's 137 commenters out of 180 commenters. Just wanted to give those commenters credit. We learned a lot from this first time analysis. It created a baseline assessment for future efforts. All in all, we saw this as a success, and we hope to use this again in the future to improve our engagement efforts. Next slide, please. Now on to the demographic analysis results of the traditional engagement survey respondents. The respondents were asked questions in relation to disability, age, race, and gender. Moving from left to right, I'll start with disability. Of the respondents who gave an answer, 8% reported a disability. For age, the majority of respondents were 35 to 54, and 6% of the respondents were current students. For racial identity, 1 respondent each reported a racial identity of Black, African American, African. Indigenous, and multiracial. 97% of respondents identified as white. And gender identity. 71% of the respondents were women, 29 were men, and one was non-binary, and one identified as transgender. The results of this analysis confirmed staff and council members' initial inklings that traditional engagement tools like surveys does not fully represent the diversity of the populations of the region. We are glad we heeded the advice of our MPOSC and council members to prioritize underserved populations. It was a public engagement pilot. Next slide, please. Thank you. Staff piloted a new engagement process that prioritized underserved populations through engaging organizations connected to parks and to youth. Key to this pilot engagement process was enlisting council members and MPOS commissioners, the youth and parks team, and implementing agencies' outreach staff to help in this effort. In summary, we successfully contacted 90 organizations. This is a great start. We see this as a first step, an introduction, shall I say, to a much longer relationship. We look forward to building these relationships with hope to build even greater awareness for the 2024 update of the policy plan. The chart before you shows a breakdown of the 90 organizations by community or identity. To provide you a snapshot, we connected with 26 organizations that are Native American based, 15 organizations serve youth, and 10 organizations are equity oriented. The public comment summary report includes the rest. Next slide, please. We are most happy to report that we had a number of successful deeper engagements with 6 organizations. Before you is a list of the organization staff engaged with. This includes how many organization members were involved and how many council staff hours we spent with these organizations. We had 2 deeper engagement experiences with Urban Roots and Cycle Sisters, and we made 3 new connections through requests for staff presentations at meetings of the St. Paul Indians in Action, East Side Community Organization, and the League of Women Voters of Minnesota. We learned a lot during those pilots that we are excited to build upon in future endeavors. Next slide, please. So here's a high-level list of our engagement learnings. Trust me, we learned a lot more than this. But just to go over what you have before you is that traditional engagement approaches reach dominant culture audience as well. We learned that. The survey demographics spoke to this loudly. Reaching new audiences takes time, especially working with historically underserved populations, audiences. Relationship building needs to start long in advance. And if a relationship with an audience is cultivated only when the council needs something, it will not be successful. Participants prefer reciprocal relationships and continuous engagement. So that is what we learned. Thank you. Next slide, please. So we heard of a lot of amazing comments. One resident commented about the need for amenities for shore-based anglers, noting that fishing piers tend to be by boating docks and that there are no fish around these areas. Urban Roots, one of our organizations we connected with, commented on the need for telling histories that connect to the land, the events that happened there, and how the land has changed. Urban Roots advocated for a history that is reflective of the region, included in the park, and embedded in educational programming. Cycle Sisters, another organization we connected with a deep conversation, is a woman-based African-American organization that advocates for, in this statement, regenerative places that feed the soul and body. They would like to see a more welcoming park system that is not just in their locale, but throughout the park system. People of color should feel welcome wherever they go. Next slide, please. All in all, we had a great public comment period. We had 190 submittals with 2 to 10 comments apiece. That's a lot of advice. Over Overall, the public comments were overwhelmingly in support for the 12 system additions. There were over 60 separate comment submittals for proposed individual regional trail search corridors. We also did hear and understand the concern to take care of the existing system before adding more. We heard support for natural resource conservation. Comment supports prioritizing natural resource conservation over recreational use. For example, there is a proposal to change acreage thresholds for designating park reserves. The other two items that received a lot of support and comment were regional trails and water trails. There was a lot of comments and support of creating a seamless system that connects regional parks with regional trails. Some concerns, and then there was also a lot of support for water trails as well. Don't want to forget those. Some concerns include environmental impacts and costs. This wraps up the public comment summary. Emmett will now speak to the draft amendment updates and refinements. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. So in addition to that system addition process, we did do a few administrative updates of the policy plan. The first one I just wanted to call out was the cost to complete the system. We refined the methodology a bit. And so even with the system additions that we're proposing, the estimate remained at $2.1 billion. And the reason behind that was because what we found is we overestimated the cost of land outside the MUSA, and some of our our research staff helped us make that adjustment. So the good news is it pretty much stayed at $2.1 billion. The second item, what I think of as an administrative update, is we updated the work plan, the last chapter of the policy plan. And one of the things that we're super excited about is this proposal to build a cultural historical study, which we incorporated, which was once a separate work plan item, but the whole idea of land acknowledgement, that we're folding that into that cultural historical study. And the other reason I bring up that study is because we think that that's really going to help our regional park implementing agencies as they work to do master planning and answer that equity analysis requirement. This will be great contextual information that they can draw from. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are almost to the end of this, where we're going to ask you two questions. We have two topics, as I said. The first is the proposal to on bridging facilities. Bridging facilities, I just want to remind you, because I don't expect you to remember everything about parks, just most everything. These are intended to introduce new visitors to the regional park system. So the whole idea of these bridging facilities it's about new visitors, bringing them into the system and helping them really acclimate and feel welcome and invited. So that's our first topic we're going to discuss, and it's a minutia about that. But the second item is the proposal to change regional trail boundary requirements, and it has to do with mapping. So next slide, please. Okay, so bridging facilities, this special recreation feature. Our current draft language in the policy plan proposes not to include bridging facilities in the annual use estimate. So we're saying when an agency adds a bridging facility, for the record, there are still 0 bridging facilities in our system, but Three Rivers is proposing to add a few bridging facilities. The idea is that if they're designed correctly, their success will be reflected in increased visitation in future use estimates. So they're going to be driving new visitors into the other parts of their system. This was a negotiated agreement, and it was one where I think we're going to live with it. I want to commit as council staff that we will return to this topic in 4 years when we take up the policy plan again to explore whether we should count visitors at bridging facilities as part of the annual use estimate. I'll just add one final thing before I ask you if you support this proposal. I think that there was some nervousness among regional park implementing agencies that if we open the door to counting of bridging facilities, agencies are just going to flood the regional park system with bridging facilities. I don't think that's going to happen, and I think most people don't feel it's going to happen, but that's one of the reasons why people were leery about counting visitors that go to bridging facilities. So my feeling is once we get the wind in our sails and we kind of figure out what a bridging facility is, we will maybe at some point in the future we will count them. But what we wanted to ask you today is, do you support this proposal? I am going to stop talking, and you may ask me questions or respond.
Chair, you're muted.
Thank you, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen. I probably should be permanently muted after tonight, but I wanted to call on the MPOS chair, Anthony Yaruso. You should know that this portion of tonight's meeting is being run by people with Italian names, so just watch out here, folks. But Chair Yaruso, if you have commission members that would like to speak, I hope you'll call on them because I can't see all of the faces or all of the names. But who has questions or comments they'd like to make? Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I just want to provide one question for clarity. Shoot, and I'm going to forget it, but I'm going to remember the other one. One, I just want to also acknowledge that in the survey findings, there was a statement that they are good at reaching traditional audiences, but I want to call out that men were were also significantly, white men were significantly not underrepresented in the survey. And I think that's important. Like all the other audiences are important too, but I just want to call that out as one thing that what the survey is really, really good at is white women, which is great to know. If we, I don't know about other demographics about them, like income or working or non-working or age. Maybe there would be some gaps there, but I really appreciate that the staff collected that information this time so we could see that. But I think one of the things that it really pointed out to me is that we were missing that aspect of men, which I think, especially because of the role they play in many of our organizations and make up 50%-ish of our population, that was a missing piece in the survey. And then Emmett, can you just clarify in the recommendation that you have around the bridging facilities, by not are we going to collect the data but not use it for decision making, or are we going to not collect the data and not use it for decision making?
Chair Vento, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, thank you for that excellent question. That is a critical point. We are going to count at bridging facilities, but we're not going to use it to go into the funding formulas. Like that's the big worry here that, that one agency will get even more money than others or something of that nature. So it's that impact on funding formulas that's what I found to be the concern. And so we're going into this slowly. That said, it's critical that we count who is participating, because I think if there's one factor that's indicative of whether we're succeeding with the bridging facilities, it's to understand who's going to them and are they truly new visitors. Thank you. Other questions or comments?
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, for that question, because that was where I was going to. So I'm glad they're being counted. And then two things just quickly on this point. you said it was kind of a negotiated thing, so I'm a little interested in that. And then second of all, you had mentioned that Three Rivers is working on building 3 bridging facilities, but I also heard you say kind of at the end that we really don't have a definition of what a bridging facility is. So those 2 points, kind of curious about that.
Chair Vento, Councilmember Johnson, thanks for the question. First of all, I didn't mean to say we don't have a definition of a bridging facility. The thing that's really good about this update is that this update puts a lot more meat on the bone around what a bridging facility is. It describes a lot more around what that is. So I think that we've made good advancement there. Okay, what was your other question, Councilmember Johnson? I'm sorry, I'm blanking.
And thank you, and Madam Chair. It was about the negotiated piece and just kind of what Three Rivers' point of view was on it, since they've got 3 that they're working on.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Johnson. First of all, Three Rivers Park District is embarking on they will embark on a master planning process for their bridging facilities. So they actually haven't identified how many bridging facilities they're talking about. They're saying, Council, we're going to bring you to the table when we do this because we want to understand what we learn and how many would best cover, because they really are trying to cover those first and second tier suburbs in the west and northwest. So they don't know exactly how many. In terms of the negotiated agreement, we worked part and parcel with the Regional Park Implementing Agency partners and their outreach staff on fleshing out what a bridging facility is, and also just in terms of how we're defining it. And Three Rivers is okay with our proposal. I think that they would like to see us count it toward the funding formulas, but they recognize that we're moving slowly. So I like to suggest that the language that we landed on is what I think it's a consensus in the best sense of that term. It's sort of not everyone loves it, but they can at least live with it.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the policy plan is a long-term plan. Whatever happens in it is not going to happen tomorrow. The master planning process takes a long time, and construction of the things that are in a master plan can sometimes take 25 years or more to happen. So I think looking at it again in 2024 is appropriate. If we have any bridging facilities built, they're going to be just barely built by the time the 2024 plan comes around. So I don't think there's anything wrong with waiting for 4 years.
Other comments, including the MPOSC folks? Please speak up.
Chair Vento, I'm happy to go to the second discussion item too, because I don't think that either of our items are super controversial, but I thought that they were worthy of mention to you.
Yes.
So next slide, please. Thank you, Greg. I know we put the slides down, but if you could come up, I think it was slide 17 maybe. Okay, so the second question has to do with master planning for regional trails, and it deals with regional trail boundaries. And I find this interesting because during the regional trail master planning process, agencies, they provide a list of parcels to be acquired and an estimated total cost. And then when we ask them for a map, they just give us a line on a map saying, here's where the trail is going to be. And the proposal here in the policy plan is that the agencies provide an administrative boundary for the regional trail that shows both the owned acres and the acres to be acquired. This proposal would create the same expectations that we have for mapping regional parks. And so we would be applying those same rules for regional trails. I've not heard a lot of concerns for this proposal from the agencies. I think that the key thing that they want us to understand is that when they go in to the trail master planning process, they don't always know the exact alignment of the trail because those things are so darn complicated that, I mean, Councilmember Wolf's point of implementing a master plan, it is a years in the making, and regional trails cross jurisdictions, which makes them even more challenging. But I wanted to call out this new requirement because we, council staff, want to enhance how we map our regional trails. You've heard recently about park-like amenities along regional trails, and the learning for me and maybe you is that there's often significant acreage associated with regional trails. And so having just a simple line on the map doesn't really capture what the actual trail corridor is. So we want agencies to do this more accurately. And my question is, because I could go on for a long time here, but I will stop and just say, do you agree with this proposal? Does this sound reasonable? Chair Vento, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Before I open it up for questions, I want to jump in line and ask my question here. I'm wondering, Emmett, are there any examples of where only the line exists? I mean, can you give us a real life example of where it's posed a challenge?
Definitely. Let me go with many of our trails in Anoka County, just because of some of the challenges associated with trail making in Anoka County is they just have a trail along a road. Mm-hmm. And so it basically is a 10 or 12 foot alignment, and that is it. Now let's go to one that's close to your heart, the Bruce Vento Regional Trail. You know that along that trail, there is a Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary, which is about, I think it's about 35 acres of natural area, caves, and it's associated with that trail. But honestly, what we've learned, or what I've learned and it takes a long time for me, is that when I look at the map we have, our geographic information services or system, we just have a line. Like, we don't even have that large acreage affiliated with it. And so it makes it a lot harder to, sort of understand what is the total acreage of the trail, as well as when there's amenities like that nature sanctuary, we don't do a great job describing what it is, how to get there, what amenities are there, like are there benches there, are there picnic tables there, is there any water there? And so the idea is that if we start mapping these better, this is a baby step, but then ultimately we'll have a better public-facing map system.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf.
Did you say Wolf? It got muddled at the end there.
Oh, I did.
Okay. First, I'm going to ask Bob to mute. You're giving us a terrible echo, Bob. Bob, did you hear me? Thank you. Okay. And then secondly, so in concept, I think this sounds like a good idea because as I've seen over my, what is it now, 11 years on the council, you have some places where you acquire a trail and you're getting just the width of the trail and a little buffer on either side. And you have other places where you're acquiring a 5-acre parcel with a house on it and tearing down the house. And I think we need to have some consistency. I don't understand fully how much work it is and at what point in the work do you make those decisions. But I think we do need to have some sort of standards of, is it a trail, or are we going to pay for a whole bunch of local parks along the way? I mean, that's kind of, I made that point when we did the master plan in North Minneapolis, but there are other places where we've literally bought a house on an acreage and we're going to tear it down for the future trail. And are we going to pay for, a local, basically what would be a local park along the side of the trail? Or should the park agency sell that land to somebody else, or have it as a local amenity rather than part of our regional park system? I think we need to differentiate those sorts of things and decide what is a trail and what is local.
Emmett, do you want to comment?
I'll just thank Councilmember Wolf for her comment. It's a very good one. I also want to reflect on Dakota County. They are an agency that really looks at their regional trail system as a greenway collaborative. That's what they call it. And they really try to sort of take that conservation mission of the regional park system to heart as they build out their regional trails. Also, and Councilmember Wolf knows all this, that's why I'm laughing. But the destination trails in particular are ones where there are natural resource amenities. It's a highly desirable context to be on that trail. The reality of the situation is, like, you don't have, there's generally speaking, two types of trails. There's destination trails, which have that kind of natural resource quality, often more acreage. And then there's linking trail, which are the ones that I just said, like, are along the roads. The reality is that most trails don't fall neatly into that. Like I'll go out to Bob Moeller's place, Carver County. They have a Highway 5 regional trail. I mean, they named the darn trail after a road. That said, there is an amazing segment of that cuts south of Highway 5 through the Lifetime Fitness World Headquarters, across the road, and into the Arboretum. And it's going to be stunning. It's new trail that's under development right now. This is a linking trail. And, I mean, Councilmember Wolf will say, well, Emmett, they came up with a joint powers agreement and the university's allowing access for free. Okay, that's that one instance, bad example perhaps. But I'm just telling you that it just doesn't fall that neatly. Also, I believe strongly that these park-like amenities along trails are going to help us address the issue of that our regional trails aren't providing equitable access, that we have the predominant culture is really using them great. But, our last visitor study showed that we did have some challenges around regional trail use. And we and MPOS really want to do something about that. And I know the council wants to do something about that. So that's what we're trying to do.
Councilmember Wolf.
Letting me follow up. And I was not suggesting that every trail should just be a 20-foot corridor and that's it. I totally understand greenways and the like, and was not trying to imply that we should not have greenway trails. Those are the best kinds of trails. What I'm saying is we should not have 5-acre parklets along the regional trail system. That's a local park that's on a regional trail. And I think there needs to be some differentiation in there. But like I said, I don't fully understand what this means in terms of how much detail can be provided at what time. I'm just expressing support for the general concept.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. I just want to echo Emmett's comments. The way that our community, the metropolitan area has been developed definitely allows more opportunity to certain communities geographically when it comes to regional park facilities than others. And also to recognize that in many instances, it was the urban core that subsidized the growth in some ways of those regional facilities. If you think Three Rivers being at one point, including taxpayers from Minneapolis, for example, no longer. Now it's suburban Hennepin County. But even so, in the first string suburbs, they don't get as close regional access to facilities as they do in even further out exurban communities. So I think that from a geographical perspective, that's important. And also, as we have density in the urban core that's growing greater, we also have more taxpayers in the urban core and in first string suburbs that need access to these facilities as well. I have one question, and then I really want and hope that there's some commissioners that are willing to share their perspectives on this. We've had a number of conversations, and I think the idea about us coming together is that council members get a chance to hear from you directly. One thing I just wonder about is in the plan, one of the things that many agencies have been struggling with is just the increased use on trails due to the pandemic. And, you know, in some places they closed down adjacent streets to facilitate that. I've always been a fan, honestly, of separated mode trails from a safety perspective. You know, when you get a bicycle going at 15, 20 miles an hour and they can collide with another bicycle or a pedestrian on that trail, it spells really bad news. We've had all the way up to, unfortunately, deaths as a result of that kind of a collision in our system. And so I'm just wondering, has there been conversations about moving away from the multi-use trail or thinking about, has that been, I know this plan has been in development, the update, for a long time, but I'm just wondering if that came up in comments in some of the things that either agencies or individuals brought up. And then again, encourage commissioners to jump in there.
Chair Vento, Councilmember Atlas Engebretson, thanks for the question. There were a number of comments about multi-use and the exact topics that you hit on, the idea that how are we accommodating all this use when, you know, particularly there's real safety concerns. The other comment that some people said is they talked a lot about, you know, oh, we want to really use this for commuting or purposeful trips. And that's great. You know, we love the idea that our regional trail system aren't purely just recreational. I just want to mention, though, that they are recreational. And if you're riding 20 miles an hour on our trail, please stop and get onto the road, because that's just too fast. It's just too much. Our trails can't accommodate that. The agencies are in the best position to manage conflicts. You know, I think we need to set strong boundaries and expectations for safe use. But exactly what Councilmember Atlas Engebretson said is that there are parts of our system that are currently overused. The pandemic is certainly compounding that with concerns about conflicts. And so a lot of comments too, expressing this concern and the idea that, you know, we really do need to move forward safely. And we, with the agencies, are really attempting to do that.
Anyone else? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would defer if there was a commissioner that wanted to speak, but didn't hear anybody. But yeah, so but thank you to everybody for being part of this meeting. I think, Emmett, I just think the conversation and everything that you've talked about just speaks very well to the recommendation on where you're going. It's just very clear for me anyway. And just again, from that park planning perspective with my local government experience, you know, it takes a long time to acquire the property. You nailed it. We all know, you know, you've got to have the long vision so that, you know, when you are looking at seriously acquiring or property comes up, And to Councilmember Wolf's point, sometimes you got to grab a bigger piece of property to get what you need. But that's why I think those relationships with the local communities, those local park government agencies, cities, counties, whatever, where you can work to maybe divide and conquer some of those costs so that local parks, city parks can site then near the regional trail. And then just because safety was brought up, I think it's also really, again, it's that partnership between, the implementing agencies, the regional plan, and then the local city parks and trails. From a city perspective, it's a little easier if you're citing a trail because you also pretty much control the road designs as they're going through your community. So if you're a community that puts your roadways a little wider so that you can accommodate striping for cyclists on road, so that you have the separation, that's great. But to be perfectly honest, my community, Plymouth, didn't do that. And so it forced those bike users in many cases. And, it's just a perspective. So it was really encouraging in many cases, very blatantly, that the trails are for everybody, and clearly it causes conflict. So I just always appreciate the implementing agencies too, as they're working to do all of this and the big scheme of things, working with the local communities and cities along the way to, I think, make the most of the partnerships where we can so that everybody's taxpayer dollars are being used wisely. So, for me, I think this is great. I commend everybody in the work, and I'm looking forward to seeing more come from it.
Bob.
Chair Vento, I just wanted to say that I appreciate being included in this joint meeting and that I support our recommendations from our committee.
Thank you. Thank you. Other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, is there anything more, Emmett or Tracy, that you would like to share with us?
Excuse me.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I support Emmett. This is Miss Lolita Davis Carter. I support you too, Emmett. I love this presentation. Thank you, is it Congress Johnson? Her comments, was that just Johnson? Yeah. I really loved your comments. I really did. I really appreciate them. Thank you, Emmett. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Miss Lolita. Thank you.
Thanks, Lolita. And Bob.
Anyone else? Okay. And Emmett and Tracy, you've concluded?
We've concluded our presentation, and just thank you for your time. And I really appreciate you interrupting the last information item. I'm sorry that I hope this didn't go too long, but we really appreciate the time.
We appreciate your patience with us. I was not timely in terms of getting to you all at 5:30. So to the MPOS Commission members, thank you very, very much for your patience. We really appreciate it. And next time when we do a joint meeting, I'll make sure that we take a few minutes, or Chair Lilligren will take a few minutes and make sure that we get to do proper introductions. So thank you all. And with that, we'll return to Ms. Tara Beard. And Greg is going to get us back on track here. That was a great presentation. I appreciate that.
Well, I had said I was waiting the whole year with excitement. So what's another half hour? I believe we were on the last slide, where essentially I was just looking for feedback, questions. If this this kind of revamped way of thinking kind of worked for you all and felt clear, generally how you've, second to last, I guess. Yeah, there you go. If this sort of reorganization and some particular scoring criteria category changes kind of felt right to you, or if there's additional information that would be helpful to think it through.
Committee members, your thoughts? Anybody have any comments?
Councilmember Bento?
Yes, I can't see you, but go ahead, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you very much. Tara, great presentation. And I'm thinking about scoring criteria as it relates to sustainability. A lot of the cities that I work with, cities in my district, are thinking about things like green building codes, where when they are giving TIF money or tax benefits to a developer, then they are saying to those developers, hey, you need to go a little bit farther beyond just the building code when it comes to EV charging infrastructure or insulation or renewable energy, whatever it might be. If you want our benefits, if you want our money. And I know that when it comes to our scoring criteria, some things are obvious around sustainability, like transit-oriented development and walkability. Those all have sustainability components. But I'm hoping you can fill me in a little bit more on that particular aspect. Thanks.
Councilmember Lee. Oh, I'm sorry. I should let.
Should I respond?
Yes, I'm sorry. It's been a night. Okay, go ahead.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom. Yes, thank you for that question. So we have had some uniquely specific criteria already that gets at things like air quality or water quality. And we've been working really hard with staff, Cameron Bailey, Eric Wycheck, Mauricio Leon, community development colleagues who work in the weeds of climate change and resilience and water resources, et cetera. And so that will definitely be something we will give you a preview of in a little bit more detail in December. But rest assured that we are thinking about the best way to kind of ask those questions that meet, the framework of scoring criteria that I kind of went over in the beginning. So a little bit of a stay tuned, but rest assured we're having great conversations. And at this point, it's looking like some criteria that differentiates between kind of greenhouse gas emissions and then a different criteria that looks at conservation and protection of natural resources. And we're kind of hammering out the specifics, but those are kind of the two overarching comments we're talking about right now, if that's helpful.
Great. Good question, Councilmember Lindstrom, and a good answer. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for a great presentation, team. And I had a question about, as we think about the questions and the metrics, are we going to, when we say we're going to make the metrics more clear, does that also mean rephrasing them in the written form so that they'll be clear? And also, would we workshop these kinds of questions and metrics with the folks that will be impacted, whether that's the developers or the city staff who usually would be working with us? Thank you.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Lee, great questions. Kind of to your first point, you all will absolutely be getting in your packet for the 21st ahead of time an actual list of the scoring criteria, as proposed at that point in time. And that will certainly reflect a lot of different methods of outreach, some stronger than others, depending on the nature of the scoring criteria and whether or not it's something that, had come up as something that needed some extra eyes on it, or if it was something that was working smoothly in one of the more relatively understood scoring criteria. So there will be definitely specific criteria for you to see. And absolutely, yes, we are not just sort of looking big picture. We're also saying, okay, even in criterion where there isn't a question about its importance, is it worded in a way that is understandable? Is it, redundant? Is it plain languaged? And so we're still working on those kinds of pieces, and have absolutely been doing outreach. It can get tricky when you're looking at dozens of criterion, and it's kind of continuously evolving. So I would say kind of our strongest resource for tapping into kind of folks most affected has certainly been metro cities and their the feedback from their working group of participant cities that have frequently applied for these programs, et cetera. Again, our outreach survey, which included development partners, and just in general, over the past year, we've been reaching out more to the development community to kind of bring them to the table, even though cities are the participants and the applicants for the program. So, I think in all kind of outreach and engagement processes, there's always room to improve. And the good news is we get to look at the scoring criteria every year. So I would definitely encourage when you get to look at the specific criteria ahead of the December 21st meeting with a little bit more context behind where it came from and who was engaged, that if, some folks were left out, if there are some opportunities to do better next year, please let us know. But we are in that sort of annual cycle. At a certain point, we have to adopt that criteria and move forward with that year's programs. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad you can see me. I can't see you on the thing right now. So I have to say, I'm really appreciative of this approach. I've been around here for a long time and we've had lots of little tweaks without looking at the big picture. And I appreciate taking that comprehensive review over a long period of time. In general, the approach sounds great. I'll reserve final judgment until I see what it actually looks like in numbers, but I appreciate the approach that we're taking of getting back to basics, getting things that apply to everybody, trying to be fair to all parts of the region in the scoring. I mean, that sounds very appropriate to me, and I'm looking forward to December's presentation. Thank you very much for what you've done.
Thank you.
Other comments? Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thanks. I just wanted to share, Tara, I'm really looking forward to the things I have questions around are about the rubrics themselves. And I think that's where, when we have these projects come before us, that's where we've had more issues. And so I've been waiting for this conversation for about 1.5 years. So we're almost there, but the conversation is really, I think, going to take place when we start looking and talking about the rubrics. I want to just echo support behind some of Councilmember Lindstrom's comments. And I think what you were talking about, the one thing that I would have added to that was really looking at conservation and stewardship in the development of facilities and spaces. I've seen a lot of transit-oriented development projects that really ignore green space around the site or on-site or as a part of their development. And both from a perspective of the livability for the people who end up living there and for the opportunities for the local communities, I think that that's really important. So I'm hoping that's what you were commenting around, but if not, I just wanted to make sure. I'm hoping to see that as a part of the rubrics conversation. I think the other piece is around equity. Different communities need different types of things. It's just not a one size fit all. And I think it absolutely can be done to provide rubrics that provide enough individualization that you meet the needs of the different types of communities we serve. And so I think that's something I just want to acknowledge as we talk about equity. I think that's one of the things that have come up, that in certain communities, not all of the projects are exactly the same. The one thing I would ask also is that we received a couple of fairly aggressive, no, I don't mean aggressive, but assertive, communicative emails during our last round from a couple different developments, particularly in parts of Minneapolis that were for affordable housing that didn't make it through. And I'm looking through my notes. I just think it's an opportunity for us to be responsive. Doesn't mean we give people the yes answer they were looking for, but to, be critical of ourselves and look at how those projects failed, especially because of the need for affordable housing, and was there something that we need to take away from that, just as a standpoint of looking to see if there is something. If not, but to, I think, be able to show that we're taking feedback and critique and considering it. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Councilmember Johnson.
Okay, my dogs are barking. Hopefully they'll stop. So, first of all, come here, Peanut. I want to thank Tara and the team, because it's a team. I'm on the work group, and a bunch of us are here on CDC. But I just really appreciate this effort, and it's a heavy lift, but I think the direction where they're going has been so good. And I know the outreach too, certainly to Metro Cities, just had a discussion about their engagement. And I think Terry has expressed too, that even once this rolls out, we will still continue to take the feedback and refine it along the way, of course. I would also say that to Councilmember Lindstrom's point, and also Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson, one of the things that I think, and maybe this isn't right on, but we should keep an eye on is, at the legislature, there are efforts, and they're well-intended efforts, right? When we're trying to do affordable housing, and I mean we in the big picture, that local mandates or building codes or extra requirements drive up the cost of housing. Shh, come here. And I think, when those efforts gain momentum, they sound good, but I think that, maybe through our government affairs efforts too, we need to help legislators understand that some of these things that we're trying to accomplish, there's purpose in why we're trying to ensure that these requirements or mandates with the money to enable the project, why they're important. And so the one size fits all state laws don't drill down to what we're trying to accomplish in our Thrive goals. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say is, those things that we're trying to do, sometimes at the Minnesota legislature can get sidetracked pretty easily. And again, I just really have to say, to the entire Met Council team, but especially, the group that works on housing, from the bottom of my heart, it's our Employee Recognition Day. And I think you guys are doing a great job. And I'm just so grateful, for the impact you're trying to make. So hats off to you. And thanks, Tara, for your hard work. And I'm hoping you all really love where this is going, and everybody chime in when you see the rubrics and the words, because they do matter.
Thank you.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thanks. It's really good to hear the perspective. It's been great working with the housing work group and also the housing staff, and learning a lot about the process and being able to kind of exchange ideas. One of the things that I like the most about this process, I guess, is on page 5, is the main high-level purpose of review being making sure that the scoring criteria is clear and it's more strongly linked to the statutory guidance, and that our scoring and measurements reflect that, as well as be the objectivity in measuring that also affects accountability, and that is very important, as well as continuous improvement. So thanks a lot. And then Councilmember Johnson, I think it was Councilmember Johnson talked about, how do we work with the legislature? And I think we can work with our partners, Greater MSP and other partners, including the cities, Metro Cities, to work with the legislature as well, because it takes more than a scoring criteria. It takes more than a housing group to accomplish the goals that we have for livable communities.
Great. Any other comments, questions? I want to add my thanks, Tara, and I also want to thank Michelle and Lisa and Greg. We had employee recognition this morning, and I hope every employee in the organization felt the and Hannah, I almost forgot you, Hannah, I apologize. I hope that every employee in the organization knows the gratitude that we all have for you. But in particular, I want to do a shout out for this team that helps make these meetings possible, makes them informative and productive, and helps us meet the needs of the region. So great presentation, and we look forward to the next one, Tara. Anything else before we adjourn? Thank you all. You've had the patience of saints, and for that, Councilmember Lindstrom, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, Tara, I think you started your presentation by saying that thinking about scoring criteria is fun, which is proof positive that you are in the right job.
Good. And if there are no other comments for the evening, I just want to thank you all for your patience with me. Again, I think it's kind of hangover from Friday the 13th, but I really appreciate you all, and have a good evening. We'll see you at the council meeting on Wednesday afternoon. Bye-bye.